Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session on student belonging and online courses. My name is Jason Levin. I'm the Executive Director of WGU Labs. We're an innovation lab. We work with early stage education startup companies focused around problems that we care about. I think the broader problem we're focused on today is how do we take learnings from social psychology and apply it into digital courseware. So I have three panelists who run early stage EdTech companies. Maybe I'll let them introduce themselves.
Okay. Hi, my name is Beth Porter. I'm actually formerly the CEO of Riff Analytics. We were recently acquired by a company called Esme Learning, and I am now the president and COO of that company. Riff Analytics does analytics around live and asynchronous interactions, mostly between learners, although we do have some coaching and executive and corporate company that have adopted the software, and Esme Learning is a boutique OPM.
Katy? Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Katy Kappler. I'm CEO of InScribe. So we're a virtual student support platform. We leverage the power of community-based support and artificial intelligence to help students connect with answers, resources, and individuals across their institution that help them successfully navigate their education journey.
Great. Hi.
Sara?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Leone. I'm the CEO of GreenFig. We are an organization that partners with higher education institutions like Western Governors University to provide career pathways to adult learners that are looking to either accelerate in a career or transition into what we call a codeless or a code-adjacent career. Careers that demand digital skills and data proficiency, but aren't necessarily focused on coding or more technical skill sets, things like digital marketing, sales, customer success, etc.
So I think it'd be great to learn a little bit more about the product you developed and why you developed it. Beth, you have such interesting software. Tell us about what it does and how it works and why you chose to build it.
So I started as a teacher. I was very interested not just in learner achievement, but in how learners work with each other to learn, and how, in fact, oftentimes when students really feel like they own their knowledge, it's because they've been able to connect with other learners and they've created that knowledge together with them. So for a long time, I was very interested in how we learn socially and how social interaction contributes to learning. And I found myself at MIT. I was working in a lab with social scientists and a group that was really interested in a domain called social physics, which is basically how you measure social interaction and then use that to develop insights about who's doing what, where, and how, and why that's why that's interesting to learning. Of course, it should be pretty obvious to everybody, which is that most of the time we set up a social context for learning. Everybody gets together, and then you decide, hey, we're going to learn today. We're going to do some content, or we're going to do some interaction, or we're going to do some problem solving, or brainstorming, or whatever. And so we were measuring that through the use of a physical device. Like we would all be wearing, like we're wearing these lavalier mics, and then it would pick up voice and proximity. So if I'm having a conversation with you, we would be able to measure that interaction and then do, derive interesting insights from that. Well, video was really the medium of choice. We were working with MIT on some online courses, and we thought, well, this is perfect. This is exactly what we should be doing. We should measure the ways that people interact when they're online together, and then use those insights to help them understand how they show up in their online interactions, whether that was through chat or through video interaction. And we do that by giving people who are in the interaction feedback about themselves so that they can develop self and situational awareness and then use that to improve their ways of interacting over time. And we did that for a while in the lab, and then we brought the company out and started with analytics as a way to bring those kinds of insights to anybody, pretty much anybody who wanted them.
Yeah, we came across Beth's company during the pandemic, and I thought, I'm on WGU's executive staff. I report to the president. I'm like, man, our e-staff meetings need this.
That's a common reaction.
And Katy, I know you've been thinking about this problem for a very long time, and I'm curious, if you could tell your story about your path to how, when you first thought about this conceptually, and then how and when you built it and what it does.
Yeah, so I'll date myself a little bit. So I was an early employee of a company called eCollege, which some of you may know. It was one early learning management platform, late 90s. And what was unique about eCollege was at the time, it decided to focus on supporting institutions that were at the forefront of rolling out fully online programs. So if you were doing fully online back at that time, we were probably the technology that was powering you. So for me, what that meant is not only a front seat to seeing how technology and innovation opened the door to learning to an entire population of students for whom a four-year degree would not have been possible otherwise. But it also meant that I was working always with non-traditional students. So these were not only students who were learning online, but working, parenting, many first in their family to go to school. And it was clear there was all this energy going into, like, how do we recreate the classroom experience for these learners and thinking about the academic piece, and very little thought going into all the other things that compose a fully formed learning journey. And there'll be a lot of themes here about the importance of social interaction and social connection as part of that learning experience. So when we launched InScribe, we launched it specifically for non-traditional students. And we created it as a space that had the flexibility, the adaptability, and the accessibility to allow them to interact with their peers, with individuals on campus, on their own terms, and in a way that felt very authentic to them and how they wanted to represent themselves and show up in their learning experience.
And Sara, I was really impressed by like the pedagogical rigor of GreenFig, and it was obvious to me that a lot of thought went into the design, the concept of the whole thing, and I'm curious, like, if you could tell, when you started thinking about that and how you landed there.
Yeah, well, so I mean, interestingly enough, we started as a fully online synchronous program before we needed fully online synchronous, and there were a number of things that we found that were really effective with that model, and there were things that we found that were not effective with that model. So first and foremost, at the very onset, we know that really preparing people for jobs in the workforce, a big part of what we need to deliver to them is incredibly practical skills that they can apply pretty quickly back on the job or in an interview process. And so at the very beginning, our pedagogy started with, how do we bring in practitioners? How do we bring in folks that are in the role who can really partner with us to develop very authentic, accessible learning experiences? Because we knew for especially a lot of the adult population that we were serving, 80% of our learners today are women, that going back into this learning environment is incredibly, incredibly intimidating. And so we spent a lot of time just asking questions. So we, which is always a little bit scary, right? You want to ask questions and see what you're doing right, but you also, and you want to know what you're doing wrong, and you hope that the recipe that comes out of that can really be valuable in terms of improving the experience. And we did just that. We spent a lot of time, and we still do spend a lot of time talking to the learners, understanding how we meet them at their needs. And one of the things that was really clear was they needed on-demand content, right? So that was super clear. They also needed support, and I think that's as we think about sense of belonging, it was very clear to us that we didn't want to go from a fully synchronous platform to something that was fully asynchronous, because we knew that the engagement of our instructors, we knew that the online social learning component, the community, the network that they were able to develop was really, really impactful. And so we put different products in the market and really studied the results using things like NPS surveys or just customer interviews, and over time it really helped us to develop what we have today, which I will say is imperfect. We're always looking to optimize it for sure. But it's a hybrid program that creates great outcomes for our students. So hopefully.
How did you land on the code adjacent?
So lots of coding boot camps out there, right? Lots of news that the best path to a career is through software development, through data science, et cetera. And granted, there's a lot of opportunity in that space. And so if you're a math whiz or you really enjoy the development aspect of things, great, good on ya. But the vast majority, I mean, I don't know how many people in this room, like, if you had told me I had to be a developer when I was coming out of college, I would have told you to pound sand, right? I went into community or into communications for a reason. And so when we stepped back and looked at, well, if you just take the numbers, you look at the makeup of the economy, there are 7 times more professionals in what we would call hybrid business roles. And even when we look today at where the growth is coming, we still see that hybrid roles are going at a pace of 3 to 1 in coding. And again, it's primarily because it spans so many roles within, so many business roles within so many different organizations. And we saw it as a unique opportunity to approach that market where we saw so many other people leaning into the development side of things.
Yeah, we talked about belonging. That's really the topic of the session, and it's kind of an abstract term. If you ask a lot of people what their definition of belonging is, you get a lot of answers. A collaborator of mine, Jeff Cohn, has done a lot of research in the field that's has really strong empirical outcomes, and but even his definition varies from other people. And I was curious if we could go through the panel and talk about what you mean by belonging.
For us, we really focus on how people interact with each other, rather than just feeling like they're in a community where like-minded people are, for example, because that could be a good definition of belonging, right? I'm here, I'm in this chat room, or I'm in these game spaces, or I'm wherever I am, but I know that I'm here with other people who share my interests, or who have, same kinds of goals, or whatever, But for us, it was really about interaction. And so when I think about belonging, I think about the fact that I'm having an interaction with somebody, or I'm getting a signal from that somebody that they're listening, like Natalie is giving me the signal right now in the front row, and that makes me feel like I belong in this conversation, and I'm having a sense of belonging right now with Natalie. So we think of it in that way, right? This very, very sort of more intimate space of what happens when you actually have an interaction with somebody else. That's how we sort of think about it.
How about you, Katy?
Yes, so I would say we kind of level up a little bit on, from the micro interactions and then at a more macro sense. And when we think about belonging, we talk a lot about feelings of safety, feelings of, that I'm accepted by the group or the organization that I'm part of. And that sense of safety also then fosters confidence and an ability to engage and put yourself out there. We talk about sort of the impact of not having that sense of belonging, which I think probably we have all experienced at some point in our life, where you're like I either feel like I'm the fifth wheel here, or even worse actually is not knowing if you belong, because that uncertainty wears on a person and wears them down, and that individual will start to recede into the background because they can't it becomes overwhelming to manage that level of uncertainty. So you can easily translate the idea of having a strong sense of belonging and foundation, how that could be critical to your ability to learn and function effectively in your education. And so helping students establish that among their peers, and then also in that relationship with their institution, is where we focus and where we think about.
Well, I was going to add something to what you just said, which made me feel like, so you're talking about not feeling comfortable being a coder. That's a great indication of not feeling a sense of belonging. Tapping into a whole market of people who are like, that is not my community. I will never fit in there. Help me bridge the gap between, right? Feel a sense of I can do this. I can do this other thing that's right next to the thing that needs to be done, the job to be done. Anyway,
well, and I think you find that all the time in these spaces, is that often our perception of what is going to make a student feel like they belong is not correct.
That's right.
So we can talk about this later, but letting it happen organically and let students find their own sense of belonging is actually what allows it to happen. You cannot prescribe it.
Yeah.
And how about you, Sara?
Yeah, I mean, I
Sorry,
will
we're
play
just
off
jump
of that.
into.
The sense of belonging to be effective in one of our courses is so critical, right? It's so critical to them building confidence, to them building competence, to them engaging as part of the overall experience. And so we spend a lot of time really thinking about, again, in the design, how from even the asynchronous aspect of things do we help them develop that belonging? How do we create content that feels like I'm talking to a mentor instead of I have somebody talking to me and trying to teach me these things? all the way through the elements where they do have a higher touch, and they can get a sense of, wow, we have everybody introduce themselves, which, I'm sure like we do that in lots of different forums, but stories start to come out very clearly, very early in the process of like, oh, I'm not the only one who is super behind in this, or I'm not the only one who stepped out of work for 5 years and needs to figure out how to develop these skills. And so, we use Slack primarily as the channel, but you see these really rich engagements around just getting that going at the beginning, where somebody then feels like, oh, I do belong here, right? I actually do fit into the mold of this and have the confidence to know that that I can overcome my imposter syndrome or whatever they might be dealing with, so that they can be successful.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. Like Slack is a tool, Riff is a tool, InScribe is really a tool, and it's really about the pedagogical design. How do you incorporate that tool? And you're in a unique position, Sara, where you've created the whole experience and own it, whereas Katy and Beth are a tool that other people use. And so I'm kind of curious, maybe Katy, if you could talk about what have you noticed that works and doesn't, and how do you hope to influence that?
Yes, what an excellent question. So I alluded to it just a little earlier, which is, I think people, there's a desire when somebody's like showing anxiety, or just to say like, don't be nervous, don't be anxious, but just telling students to belong, it doesn't work. And so what we generally advise, especially if that sense of belonging is one of the core things you're trying to enable with your students, is again, number one, get out of the way. Don't presume that you know what your students want to talk about, and try not to be the one in there talking. Let them talk to each other. Make the space theirs and really establish it as a safe space where they can say what they want to say. So this is often very hard for institutions, some of them, but trust your students to have this space and to own it and to behave appropriately, because actually they will. And what we see is very much what Sara alluded to, where one student will show some vulnerability in that space about, I'm not a math person, I'm coming back to school after 30 years, and the outpouring of positive feedback from their peers is so gratifying to see, and then that builds on itself. The other thing that we often advise is the more the merrier. It's kind of our concept when it comes to community. I think the other thing institutions will sometimes think is, well, I'll build a community for my freshman students, and I'll build a different community for the STEM majors, and they'll slice and dice their students in these odd ways. But what I come back to is like, you don't necessarily know where that student is going to find belonging. So don't presume that how you identify your students is how they identify. So creating a larger space where more people can come together and talk to each other is going to get you to that end goal faster.
Are there any schools that you work with that you think are particularly good at building belonging in an online setting?
Well, we have one, Rio Salado College, that we've been working with. They are amazing. So Rio Salado College, community college in Maricopa County in Arizona, serves 60,000 students every year. 29,000 of those are online learners. 51% students of color, 76% Pell eligible. So traditional community college in many ways. We got connected to them through the College Innovation Network, which is a really interesting organization that brings together universities and solutions like ours to help think about belonging and engagement. And what Rio did is all the things that I just said, although we didn't really have to teach them how to do that. Mm-hmm. From the very beginning, we want this to be owned by our students. In fact, they brought the students into the design process early on, and they really led the whole creation of the community, the branding of it, how it's going to launch and how it's going to be communicated. And they welcomed all 60,000 of their students into that space. And we were able to do a research study around that community. Kind of format of the study was, we launched in August, we did an initial survey in September, we did a second survey 2 months later, asking students a series of questions that get at belonging. And the students that were participating in the community at both points in time showed significantly higher levels of belonging than those students who did not. But I think the more interesting data point is the set of students who at the first survey had not participated in the community, and then by the second survey showed the same level of increase in belonging as their counterparts who'd been participating all along. So in just 4 weeks, you're able to influence that number in a way that is then going to have a direct impact on that student's ability to succeed at school.
Beth, I wanted to ask you the same question as a pedagogical tool. How have you seen it used and misused? Riff?
Yeah. I'll start with the misuse one, which people will probably feels familiar to them, which is this idea that you can grade participation in these communities, which is just like the worst. It's like, oh, I knew this question was coming, and I still feel bad about having to answer it every single time I'm on a call with somebody. So we really just immediately just steer right out of the way of that whole idea. We have to talk people out of that sort of notion completely. It's very uncomfortable because it's clear it just comes from just the totally wrong place, and we often get that. How can I track what people are doing and then punitively weaponize the data to make them feel terrible? I'm like, that's not how they ask the question, by the way. I'm saying it back, but anyway. So that's the bad. That's what we get sometimes, often. On the good side, it's really people who are focused on teams and peer development and the creation of a learner community. So we work with business schools most of the time, and the partners that we have are mostly business schools. And in particular, people who are going through education designed to change the progression of their careers. So we work more at the top end of the market, but the impulse is the same. They want to be able to create learning communities that are not traditional, right? They're either based in the workforce, they're based in adult communities. We really try to emphasize this, like you should learn the way that you work. You should work the way that you learn. These things should not be so far apart. And so if you work in teams and you work in collaborative spaces, whether they're vertical or they cross the whole organization, that's how you should learn.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot of time talking to our business schools about how not to just stand and deliver everything that you have to say that you're an expert in, but to stand and deliver a little bit and then stand out of the way and let a learner community take all that fruitful, interesting stuff that you have to share and make their own knowledge out of it. And so a lot of what we did research on with our NSF grant was around how you demonstrate whether that's working or not.
Right.
Did it do anything? Did you have a successful outcome at the end? And so what we showed in the studies that we did was all around how that positively reinforces all the things that we want to be able to show that we can do, which is persistence, performance, and satisfaction. And so
it's really interesting, and I want to ask Sara, being on the flip side of that, what have you learned along the way, and what are some techniques that you now use to foster a sense of belonging in your course?
Yeah, so definitely we've maintained live components throughout the course. So there's always an opportunity to engage with a practitioner. So if you need help, you need to ask questions, etc. Everything we do is cohort-based. We want to make sure that people are going through this together, that they know that they have a community, that they can ask for help. We also have a layer on our team that we call student success. Some people might think of them as a TA, but their mission in life is to help students get through the process. And so for us, student success is, the name needs to be tied directly to the outcome that they're looking to drive, but their role really is, if they see people falling behind, if they, we've got risk profiles, if they see that they were engaged on an online session and have fallen out and haven't, turned anything in, it's a clear signal to us that there may be an issue at hand, and it may not be. They may feel like they're not worthy to finish the course, or they don't get aspects of it. And so their role is to make sure that they can help fill in those blanks, and bring them in if they need to be introduced to other folks in the particular cohort, etc. They can facilitate that role. The other thing, and we've been playing with this quite a bit, and I think you may have seen some of this yesterday, but we don't just leave Slack outside as kind of the community component. We actually started embedding Slack prompts in our asynchronous learning so that as folks are going through different parts of the course and maybe learning a particular concept, they can actually go discuss it as a group. And if they need to be able to combine forces, or we definitely recommend that they buddy up and develop a support network with other folks in the course. So we're still, I mean, like, it's when everything is online, it's obviously, you can't hug them, right? Like, you can't give them that. And so it's how do we make sure that we talk about how do you wrap your arms around that student and make sure that you're helping them cross that finish line?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of embedding things inside the course in a way that's authentic to the learning and relevant to the context. Like Beth mentioned, like you mentioned, and I think, the course is still, in my opinion, where all the bandwidth is. That's where the student's mind is, and that's the best chance to attack it. Actually, Katy, I've seen a lot of really interesting courses built using Slack. I wonder if you could tell us about using InScribe. I wonder if you could tell us one of your an example of something you thought was really cool inside the course.
So I think so our communities get used in lots of different contexts in universities. So sometimes they're used on the admission side. The Rio example I gave was really a student-driven community. We also do a lot of learning in academic communities. And this idea of integration and just-in-time support is also very near and dear to our heart. So one of the projects that we work on was with Arizona State University. We helped them build a community of math learners that I think is now over 60,000 individuals. And part of that process was not just mapping and understanding the types of questions students be asking in the community, but actually embedding it directly into their learning experience. So not just as they're learning, but as they're practicing and as they're doing homework, they have one-click access to that support community. When they launch it, we know exactly what they were working on. We present back to them the other questions that students have asked on the topic that they're working on at that moment. Maybe they can find what they need right there. They can also then post a new question, which gets tagged with all the context of what they were working on and learning, and then that gets submitted to the community. Those communities also really promote, again, peer-to-peer support. So it's not just the faculty member or the TAs or the tutors that are jumping in. And in many of those communities, 70 to 80% of the responses that come back are actually from peers rather than from faculty or other leadership in those spaces.
Yep, and that's where some of the best learning happens.
It is, and some students prefer to hear from their peers.
Yeah, no, it's...
Well, in adult learning communities, a lot of the expertise is inside of the other adults. It's not with the TAs or the coaches or anything.
Yeah.
So they're only going to learn it from the other people who are in that community. They're never going to learn it from the TA.
Yeah. The other advantage I think you get in this context-specific engagement is, so Chegg, Course Hero, these are big topics of conversation today. If you talk to your students and they're being honest with you, I would say 99% of them have used those products at some point in time. Yeah. But when you ask them and you go a level deeper, like, why are you using that? There's a big portion of those students who use that product because when they're stuck on Sunday night at 11 o'clock and their homework is due, they have no alternative. And if you just give them an alternative, they will use it. And so thinking through the positive aspects for the institution and the faculty member as well, I think we don't want to lose sight of that.
So WGU Labs is a startup accelerator, and we have two folks who've gone through and one who's midstream. And so I was curious if I could hear a little bit about what your experience was working at Labs and what you learned or hope to learn. Maybe we'll start with Sara.
Why don't you start down the way since they're... end with me, who has the least amount of experience.
I thought I would go the other way.
Are you, all right, you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. He's going to make me start.
He has a plan, Sarah.
So, the team at WGU Labs has been instrumental in just helping us understand how do you work with an organization of the size and scale, and how do you navigate some of the discussions and understand what lines up with your pedagogical approach versus the universities. And we've spent a lot of time dialoguing around that so that as we develop a product that we take to market in tandem, it doesn't look just like what we would do. It has this blend of learning inspiration that can be really impactful. So I would say that for sure. It's also been, I've had the pleasure of working with a number of the academic team, and so it's been really interesting to have conversations with them just in terms of the model and understanding the model and what the student makeup is and how they approach the different learning components. I think we'll know a lot more when we officially launch and have a program in market. But it's been fantastic so far.
And Katy, you've actually been through 2 of our programs.
I just can't stop.
Yeah. Can you tell a little
3 if you can. Anyway, so again, there's many things I could talk about. We're going to run out of time. But what I'll focus on is the research benefit that we've had of partnering with both labs and CIN and other work that we've done with Western Governors. We're a small team. Research actually isn't a core competency of most of the members of our team, and we don't really have the time to organize that. And so being able to tap into a team of consultants and data scientists and researchers who understand how to design the study, how to write the surveys, how to deploy that in an efficient way, how to then evaluate the data that's coming back. We never would have been able to do that on our own. And so having that and then navigating that with the institution, which I don't know how many startups are in the room, but getting institutions to share their data. I don't think it's because they don't want to share the data. It's like they also don't have the time and the resources to do that. So having that third party be able to facilitate that was instrumental for us.
Yeah, I remember talking early on to Katy, and you really had an understanding of not only why you would do research from a student success standpoint, but also from a business success standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
I was curious if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I wish we would have done the research earlier. I think in education, institutions want to know that it works, and they don't want you just to tell them that, and they want to hear it from their peers as well. And so having the research that you can bring to the table when you're having that conversation that really demonstrates the efficacy in a measurable and well-designed way has shifted the conversation for us dramatically. And also as a startup, I think having that information when you're talking to investors, when you're talking to employees. I mean, even our own employees love to be able to actually, we all intuit that it's working, but then being able to see that on paper is really, really valuable.
And Beth, I was curious if you could share a little bit about your experience working with
Yeah, our
NHO.
experience was very different than Katy's because we actually were a research organization. We came out of MIT, out of the Media Lab, and we had research as our foundation from the very beginning. And we had all those crazy people who knew how to do it.
Should have partnered with you.
Mostly me, but a lot of that discipline around research we already had. But one of the things that, as a technical team primarily, we lacked was really just how to talk about what the hell it is that we do. Mm-hmm. And we had a great partner in Natalie and actually predecessors really trying to hone our story and talk about how do we develop the story, and then how do we market the story that we have to tell, and really working on content marketing, which was completely new to me as a math and science and computer science person who had done all of the technical stuff that I just want to really reinforce what Katy said. People really want to see that this stuff works, in particular if you work in an AI product. Everybody uses the 2 letters A and I together, and most of the stuff that's out there doesn't actually have real backable, scientifically proven results that talk about the things that we care about, and does it in a responsible, ethical, structured way. And so having that research to really back what you want to say about your AI, your automation, your insights, your analytics, whatever it is, however you talk about it, that's super important. And we had that discipline, but we didn't have the other stuff, so we got that the match set that we needed from the team.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm a data scientist, like researcher by trade, and when we started labs, it was like product research. And it was like, wait, something's missing. And then we hired very smart people like now, like, oh, that was a really important piece we missed. So I think, what advice do you have for startups or instructors or course builders into would you approach? What are some tips to building belonging into their products and courses and learning experiences? We'll start maybe with Sara.
Sure. I think the most important thing is just listen to your customer, right? And not that everything comes from listening, because they don't always know what to tell you. But when I say listen, we collect data points at every single part of their experience in our product every week, and we've got a very methodical way to take that data in and really analyze it internally. And sometimes it's really hard to look at, and sometimes it's really great to look at. But we tend to focus on the bad stuff, right? Because we want to make things better. But the more that you can put out there and create MVPs, create things that you want to, put concepts in the market, and then spend time studying how do people engage with it? What can we do better? What are the parts of belonging? And I think this is where maybe human-centered design, other components come in, is if you think about that journey, where are the key touch points in the journey where it's most important to tap into? And it's not through the whole thing, right? So if you can identify those really critical ones and invest your time there, you get massive turns in terms of your investment.
And Beth, what are your thoughts to share?
Well, I think that try to remember that for a lot of people that you're going to be talking to about your product, and a lot of people that you're going to be trying to convince this is the thing to do and the way to operate, this is a total mindset shift for them. They have no idea what you're talking about a lot of the time. And we found that we liked to sell into the people who understood what we were talking about, but where we saw need was the people who didn't understand what we were talking about. And we spend a lot of time educating and socializing what we do, and that is what your job is for a lot of the journey that you're on. It's like they don't actually know this new thing, and it's not the technology that actually scares them. It's like now they have to change how they do their jobs, and they have to think differently about learners, and they have to think differently about their role with respect to learners. That is all like a lot of change in a very short period of time, and for a lot of people it's a deeply uncomfortable space. So of course they're an advocate for students, but not like this. This is not how they think about it. So it's like you have to work on all of that, and then the technology is just like, yeah, okay. Of course we do the technology too.
Katy, what advice do you have?
I'm gonna sort of restate what both of you said, because I think if you're building a product and you're like, how do I really go after belonging? Times of change. When students are encountering new spaces, new experience, those are the points at which belonging gets tested the most. So when they're thinking about applying to the university or the college, when they're starting, when they're moving between years, so think about those moments in time where you can really go after that space. And then I will echo what Beth said, although say it a little bit differently, which is belonging is sort of squishy for a lot of people. What is it? Why does it matter? So I think educating yourself on the literature about what the long-term impacts of belonging can be, how it affects positive outcomes. But then also, I mean, what we have learned is you do need to just be a little bit prescriptive. So when you come in, you're kind of the thought leader for them, and you need to help them understand, like, this is how we're going to roll it out. These are the best practices where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. I'm going to show you the way. It doesn't mean you have nothing to do. Like, I'm going to show you the way to make this work for you and your students, and really be that thought leader for them, because that will make them feel more secure in the decisions that they're making, and it'll actually make them better able to execute against deploying your product correctly, so that it does have the positive outcomes that they want.
Yeah, I think I have a few closing thoughts. We only at WGU Labs, we're a nonprofit accelerator, so we're really focused on working with companies that are trying to build the future that we're trying to create. And one thing to me that comes through really clear with all three of you and really all of our portfolio companies is how important the student is. The student is at the center of everything, and that student outcomes are ultimately what we're driving. And I think the three panelists here have really shown an example of how you can align kind of the impact model and the business model, focus on student success outcomes, and learning from kind of a literature base, whether it's the MIT Media Lab or the belonging literature, or even just Katy's interest in doing more research on her product. That's really what we're looking to build here at WGU Labs. I do think we have a little bit of time left, and so if there's happy to entertain any questions from the audience.
Yes?
Do you support the idea of putting plants into the discussion for
Yes, I
growth
do.
mindset, or?
Well, maybe restate what you're saying. So I maybe misinterpreted.
So, like, for example, let's take a math class, and for the students that we work with, anxiety about math or being successful in math is a big thing. And so, like, if we're using InScribe or we have a discussion board going, would you support the idea of, say, our TAs or our coaches going in there and saying, hey, exam 2's coming up, don't freak out, this is, you can do it, like, sort of.
Yes,
kind of thing.
we do it a sort of a different way.
Yeah.
We
How
call
would you do
it
it?
seeding the community.
Yeah.
So we it sounds nefarious, but it is really for a positive reason. So we will go in, and in some cases it's just standard FAQs, but we will actually seed the type of, and emulate the type of behavior that we want the students to do through demo users. And the reason I said we do it slightly differently is I think in our experience, students respond better to these prompts when they come from other students. We have student communities where the advisors who are so lovely and coaches will go in and post things and they'll get 1,000 views and 0 responses. And then a student will post the same thing and there's 45 responses and it's like an ongoing, so there's something about the power dynamic that students just really feel more comfortable responding to each other.
One technique we've used with math anxiety and math mindset is to seed maybe like some fake data, like to say something, like to post a poll and say, hey, we found in the past that 75% of the students are nervous about, and then what's the, in this math class, is one technique we've used.
It's not even fake data.
But I mean, it's not an empirical study like peer reviewed, but I guess is my point.
Yeah. Cite complicated math data.
I mean, I'll give a slightly different perspective on this, which is that, some adult learners in particular, so they anchor to faculty, they anchor to TAs a lot of the time, and they're looking for that invitation initially to become involved in the community through the invitation. I mean, it's a lot like what you guys do with coaches, and we, in ESME, putting my ESME hat on for a second, we do a very similar thing that Sara does. So, we do welcome people in through whatever door they want to come in through. And it depends on the learner community. I think math anxiety as a whole, they're undergraduates, totally different group of people.
Right.
They have different dynamics for sure. But depending on who it is, we don't really care how they get there. We just want them to be participants somehow. Yeah.
Well, and not all cohorts are the same either, right? I mean, we have just seen dramatically different responses sometimes, and it's like, okay, the light didn't click on, so what do? Let's step back and come up with 3 new ideas for this particular cohort because they're just not engaging like the last. And now we've got a toolkit of things that we can put in place, but it was like one playbook didn't work for, even though, same basic makeup of folks coming in, just very different engagement in terms of that particular cohort.
Yeah, very much so. Different cohorts come with different characteristics, and you kind of have to be responsive to them.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate your time, the panelists' time. I think there's a lot of great information shared. I know it's getting late in the day and everyone has a dinner and a cocktail party too. So if you could join me in thanking our panelists.